I don't think the people that are reviewing decks for the first time at a lot of these venture groups, like the first pass people, maybe they don't even understand the clinical applications well enough to where they're going to be able to be like, oh, this is very nuanced and like very specific and important problem, but the market's only 1.2 billion. No. And then they just see 65 billion. Yes, they get a meeting.
Yeah. I can tell you without a fact that people that are screening decks are more concerned with their afternoon organic snack than they are even remotely concerned about reading your deck.
The companies that are like putting AI in their name or just like it's on the header, all that stuff. It's like how people were like an internet company back in like the 90s. It's just like just everything's got AI in it now. Just stop. Like it's
stop. Yeah,
just please stop.
You are not an AI-enabled solution. Stop it.
The people that are developing these things might be like microelectron, UV, this experts, and it's just so technical, right? Those are the people that are creating it. Those are the founders. They're immediately kind of thrust into this like, okay, go raise money, build this business, whatever.
I get maybe 5 or 10 announcements from Accelerator programs saying our portfolio raised, $600 billion this last quarter. But you match it up with the ones from the other Accelerator programs, they're all counting the same company.
There's almost been kind of this like financialization of the Accelerator program.
I spent time in venture capital and private equity. Doesn't that sound like a prison sentence? I spent time in venture capital.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be great if there was like this, online ecosystem where you could meet and connect with people that could do that? Oh, Medtech, that's what that is. Okay.
What? Good. There's a place? Good. I never would have known. No.
Yeah. Where it's one or two or whatever, technical, clinical, surgeon, whatever founders, and they're like, yeah, well, we've developed it to this milestone point. We just need a CEO to come in and raise $2 million.
Oh, I've got a strong opinion on this question, if I may. Spencer, this should be your most popular podcast because we are spitting gold today, as the youth would say.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that stroke is a $65 billion a year industry and that you have a solution for 800,000 stroke patients a year, because you don't.
When you're investing, you're just betting on people.
One of the fights I will always fight. I think the U.S. healthcare system is one of the greatest healthcare systems in the world.
The whole like Whoop FDA, kind of fight over the blood pressure insights or whatever they're calling them. I feel like this is a fight worth having because Hey everyone, welcome to the Medtech Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Jones, founder at Medtech. It's rare that we have a podcast where we can say they've really been there and done that on all the things in medtech, from founder, operator, to exited a company, to held academic chair positions and published literature with some of the greats in the cardiovascular space, worked in venture capital, right, and private equity, worked at one of the big consulting firms, right, has been through accelerators, has run accelerators, been a mentor, an advisor on accelerators, all through the gamut, worked with the big strategics. And that's Jeff June. He sat down with me today, full hour and a half. It's an amazing pod. So what you're going to learn today, his take, assessing the fundraising climate, and then kind of where we go from here, how founders can adapt. What's the ideal team makeup for a founding team? How much you should lean on fractional people, how you can build an ecosystem around you of support. We talk about reimbursement and what companies get wrong about that reimbursement landscape, how to sell to hospitals, but more than that, how to understand their clinical workflows and like really those clinical decision points and the branching of those things and where you can make an impact. Fundraising, capital strategy, what's right and what's wrong with accelerator programs, how we see the future of kind of consumer medtech changing the landscape on things. I can't say enough about Jeff. He's an amazing person, and maybe even more amazing is the experience and wisdom that he has and he's developed and is sharing with us in this podcast episode. So this is a good one. If you can't listen to the full thing, bookmark it, save it, come back to it. I promise there's a million nuggets in here. And without further ado, let's get into the pod. Jeff, I'm so excited to have you on the pod. This has just been such a long time coming. I feel like we originally connected like a long time ago and have just like kept in touch. Welcome to the pod. Where do we find you today? Thank
you. I'm in the glorious city of Oxford, Ohio, here with bobblehead Dan Campbell and Jameer Gibbs for you Detroit Lions fans. So excited to be here, Spencer. I admire what you do and how hard you work and all the great things you've created. So it is an honor and pleasure to be here today. So.
You are too kind. I did not get Jahmyr Gibbs yet, or my first fantasy draft, but I had him last year and I really want him again because I think he's going to have an even better year. Before we jump into kind of the hot topics in the conversations, like would love if you could just share a little bit about yourself, kind of your career, what drives you, what gives you energy.
Well, it's a pretty broad topic. So I like to think of my career in kind of three main buckets. I've been a founder in 6 companies. I have multiple exits. I spent time in venture capital and private equity. Does that sound like a prison sentence? I spent time in venture capital.
Yeah.
So I've done everything from seed stage venture and a not-for-profit all the way up to a very large private equity firm. Separately, I've been involved with taking a company public, but not one that I founded. I spent 10 years in academics. I held one of the most prestigious chairs here at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which is where my office is. I've been involved with the university in 10 years, but I taught engineering, entrepreneurship, and what's called interactive media. So everything about, think of it as consumer experience, user interface, all great things that are used in digital health today. And over the last 5 years, I've been working across a number of accelerators, just trying to help entrepreneurs, just as you do, make sense of the crazy world out there and advance things that can really improve clinical care.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And part of that crazy world that is medtech these days, I feel like is the funding environment. You know, I feel like every company you talk to, it's everybody's raising and they've been trying to raise the round for way longer than they thought it was going to take. But I know you've worked in medtech for, 2 or 3 decades now, and you've seen funding cycles, right? You've seen kind of broader economic cycles and then like within those, right, funding cycles for medtech and early stage medtech. So with the view of kind of having been through these cycles before, like how are you assessing the current funding climate for early stage medtech? We'll say, pre-seed to kind of, maybe series A, late series A. Like what's your take on it? Where are we at now and where do we go from here?
I think where we're at now, and I'm glad you positioned it as things exist in like timelines. And I think what I've seen in the last 10 years is think of it as like 3 different timelines existed within the last 10 years. You had kind of this 2015 where funding kind of went into developing, if we take devices, for example, things that were kind of device, like you're building something. And I'd say then the next context kind of moved into, well, how do we use this and how do we interpret it and how do we use that data almost in a silo in a way. And then in this most recent phase we're in, I think it's really about kind of the integration of the device as well as the data that exists in order to improve clinical care. So now let me come back to your question, which was part of that context, is that you are expected back when I started that context talk, funding would have gone to kind of advance these companies and get them to a certain point that required a significant amount of capital. As we've kind of transitioned, the playing field has changed so much. And if I look at today's environment, what I think is really true is that I see so many great entrepreneurs they can be clinical founders. They can be people with deep expertise in software development, call it AI and interpretation. And I think what we've seen is that we've seen entrepreneurs get further on limited capital. I think what people have to think about now is that I'm not so sure that the total cost of commercialization has changed. So when people ask, like, why are investors on the sideline? I think let's just say that VCs may not be the most knowledgeable people in the first place.
Yeah.
But let's also say that maybe it's very difficult to figure out that you have a company that can be founded by a clinician that gets FDA clearance and is in the market and has $500,000 in revenue without raising venture capital. It's very difficult to figure out how that company moves forward. So just in summary, I think the craziness that exists in the world for people to figure out is that these companies are highly individualized. They have very unique founders, and they've accomplished an incredible amount. And their challenge is to figure out how to get forward in an environment where venture capital can even be even more dynamic and crazy than it's ever been.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I just did like a pretty deep dive it was like the HSBC Innovation Banking. They came out with their mid-year report. And I think they looked at, previous years, obviously, and then like compared to the first half of this year. And it just seemed like there was just this massive flight to later stage. And that is M&A deals. There's fewer of them in medtech and they're getting way larger. Like I think the average deal size like more than tripled or something like that. And there was fewer of them, which was crazy. It was like 40% less total deal values, right? Were triple what they were in previous years. So I think that's something that's hanging out there. And there's just the early stage activity in general, both deals and total dollars invested is going down. But one of the more interesting things I found too was like cardiovascular, peripheral vascular, and then like neuromodulation, intraoperative, like monitoring. Those 3 were getting like over half the capital invested in early stage. And they're only about like 15% of the market, right? right? So it's like there's a flight away from early stage, but even within the early stage, you've got 85% of devices, right, that are fighting for like now 44% of the capital. So what, right? What do we do with this? I'm pretty bullish on if you're just like reaching out to VCs and you're not getting any traction, like stop doing it. Or maybe don't stop necessarily, be more targeted, and then look at family offices and angel groups and angels and really leverage your state and local and regional risk capital matching and make sure you're leveraging all the things. Because like if they're not going to play ball, you can't just have that be your only strategy. And then maybe the final point here too is just like, I think you need to be thinking more lean. Like you said, like the cost to develop things like on the software side has gone to almost nothing. Right. And we just haven't seen that chantage in medtech. And that kind of brings me to my next question. And I know we're going to talk about accelerators. So like not maybe, you know.
What? Accelerators?
Yeah.
No.
Yes, we could talk. We'll get into that in a second. But, you know, I keep having this thought of like, are we just doing this wrong? Are we doing this in like a 1990s approach in terms of like you raise your pre-seed round and then you spend all this time raising a seed round and you spend all this time raising a series A and you're spending so much time doing all of that with a very small team and you're designing goals and milestones and driving towards points, garner investment more so than like what's kind of the Occam's razor for just developing, this technology and getting it to market as quickly as possible. And like, I don't know if there's like a venture studio type model or something different. But what pops into your head thinking of like alternative viable frameworks for commercializing and developing medical devices?
Great question. So, and not an exaggeration. So I work with about 2,000 startup companies annually across some of the leading accelerators. I won't laundry list you, but if you listed them all, I'm probably somewhat have a hand in them. What I would say is that we really got to look at the founding teams that are associated with these companies, the incredible things that they can accomplish. I agree with you. I don't think the venture model is there to support these companies for the reason that you mentioned in your previous statement, that venture capital doesn't exist in the way it used to. Venture capital has become private equity. And the distinction is private equity likes to buy existing companies that are growing from 50 to 100 million in revenue, not companies that are considering they have one customer generating $10,000 and they want to scale that to $2 million. So we have this huge disconnect that exists out there. And I think what we need to be able to do is that we need to be able to provide these environments and almost like, I'll coin a phrase here. I don't know if it's a phrase I'm making up today, but almost like micro accelerators. Like I'll give you a great example. There's a program called University Lab Partners. They bring in 10 companies. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but typically they spin out of some type of academic environment. It's run by Charlotte Trippett. And these companies are just incredibly unique, and they're probably 10 years out. But these are the founders that are kind of the future of developing really innovative technology. And the reason I picked that example is that you probably never heard of this accelerator, but I think that we need to focus on the individuals within these accelerators. We don't need to cast very large funnels where we attract. Our metric shouldn't be 2,000 applications and how do we get down to the 100 companies that are going to benefit from our brand and our logo, because one, you're gaming that system so that the companies get in are valuing the brand and the logo and not the advancement they can make. And I know we're going to come back to that accelerator topic, but I think that the world, these companies go at their own pace. They're very all unique. You can have companies that can launch in a year and generate $400,000 in revenue and be looking to scale that have a very clear regulatory path as well as a clinical pathway that they've identified. And you have companies on a longer timeline. These are not the same companies with the same people and the same goals. So you're going to need to be able to provide these environments. May I say, like even in an Exo Medtech way, that people can be self-paced. They can address the issues that they need to address and they can make progress that's meaningful.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, one of the things that kind of pops into my mind thinking about this is like almost, when you're developing software, you go through these sprints, right? And it's like you're moving really, really fast and you're kind of building and testing on the fly. And it's much less like these like broad, long arcs and a lot of like small sprints. And in my head, I'm thinking like you got a group of 6 to 8 people, mechanical engineers, design engineers, people that know how to do CNC, 3D printing, and some injection molding, some reimbursement, like basically just kind of check all of those boxes. And if you just spent a month and that was kind of like everyone shows up and everybody just grinds on it, like I honestly think you could get farther in that month than a lot of companies get in a full year, if not much more. You know what I mean? Just really trying to compress that down. And it's like, okay, a company that went into that and then came out of that month, hyper accelerator, right? Like how much more momentum would they have coming out of that versus another model, right? Which is mostly demo day prep. You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of the times, especially with how far science and technology is advancing, the people that are developing these things might be like microelectron, UV, this experts, and it's just so technical, right? Those are the people that are creating it. Those are the founders. And like, they're immediately kind of thrust into this, like, okay, go raise money, build this business, whatever. And even the accelerator programs that they go through, it's a lot about developing the product or expanding your network or how do you market this and building a pitch deck and what are you raising? And it's like all of those things are good and they're big pieces of the puzzle, but you have still not developed the founding team into very skilled, versatile operators that are trained in the way that they need to be. And I think that's what we're trying to do with Exo Medtech, right? Create an environment and a playground where that can happen. A lot of those things can happen, but I don't know how many times. I've seen it a million times, and I'm sure you have too, where it's one or two or whatever, technical, clinical, surgeon, whatever founders, and they're like, yeah, well, we've developed it to this milestone point. We just need a CEO to come in and raise $2 million.
Oh, I've got a strong opinion on this question, if I may. I don't know if there's a question built into here, but so you bring up a really great point. When these programs that I work in, when I mentor with companies, I really like to think that I'm building with what they have, including the people. And what I found is more times than not, these technical founders of highly technical things, they're doing two things wrong. One, they're being told that they don't know how to do commercial. That sometimes, and I'm not criticizing accelerators here, I'll let you know when I get to that point. But they're taught that, like, okay, you're a technical founder. Why don't you go find an experienced CEO and other people around the organization? When that's the opposite of what they should be doing. These people they're incredibly, incredibly smart and well-versed in how their products are made and adopted. So that's the first thing, is that one, they're far more capable than they are being told that they are. The other thing that I would say is that when they prepare their slide deck and they go to talk about their company, talk about yourself first. Like you're saying, like you can have something that's incredibly a technical, difficult device to understand, but help me understand why you invented it and what your background is so that it has a lot of credibility when you're explaining to me exactly where you are. Then I'm anchored in the story more about your background, your expertise, what you saw clinically, and what progressed you and brought you to this point.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you're investing, you're just betting on people more than like, yes, you're betting on products, but like most products, shift or pivot or the Gen 2 or Gen 3 is what actually gets acquired. So like if you're looking at their Gen 1 and whatnot, like, yes, the IP has to be there. There has to be good rationale, etc. But if you were just going off that, there's a million companies that should be getting funding and growing. It's about the people, and you're betting on these people and the founders. And when you rip the founder out of, like, especially if they're like a large culture driver, when you rip them out of the driver's seat, like, I rarely see it go well. You know what I mean? And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're telling them like, oh, you need to hire a CEO that really knows what they're doing. Then they're not going to develop those skills, because then they think, and they have a mental framework of like, oh, well, this is just the answer. I hit the easy button and hire this person.
Well, and here's the thing, like we got to start thinking about companies in context and stages more than ever before, and not in like a seed, Series A, Series B, whatever that is. We got to be thinking about what problem that we're solving for that venture and what stage, and do we have the right thing at that right? And then think about how we kind of progress. I've also been trying to teach technical founders how to be salespeople. Like I've launched products into the hospital setting and out of the hospital setting and in a variety of different contexts. It's really getting them to understand how they can get in front of people and really gain that valuable knowledge and experience. Like selling it's not about walking in and walking out with purchase orders. It really is about kind of understanding how people use this product that you're developing and helping you see areas that might be blind to you, because you think of yourself as an N of one and not as an N of many.
Yeah, I love having that conversation of like, your experience is anecdotal by definition, and you've got to like get out of your comfort zone and talk to some other people, even if they do the same thing you do, right? People forget that. Kind of additional question on this, we'll move on to some accelerator stuff, but I feel like there's the funding model, the venture model, as well as kind of the funding, the dearth of funding that kind of we're in right now, right? And where capital's moving and the stage where it's moving, both clinical area it's moving and otherwise, right? So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I feel like the current funding challenges and the venture model challenges of like these things persist for like 3-4 years, etc. There's going to be like it may lag for the impact where we feel it, but a big impact on medtech innovation and like ultimately patients getting helped and hospitals operating more efficiently. So like, what are your thoughts? Like, are we like looking at like a lost generation of really high impact or breakthrough technologies, or even like very good technologies that will never be a 10 bagger? You know what I mean? That are just getting completely ignored because it doesn't fit the model right now, right?
No, actually, I take a more positive view of this. So I got asked this very question in front of a room of like 100 people. So I'm running a session. And the first thing that came to my mind was I told them, Thelma and Louise, I think you cannot count on venture being there and you cannot stand still. So you need to run as... And again, I don't apply this to everybody, and I say this a little tongue in cheek. You really got to run to the cliff that you as a founder, you know what you're trying to execute, and you understand that capital isn't out there for you, and you need to continue to make progress every day. And I think sometimes when we think about a new element to introduce to this is that great innovation will always find a way. That's been my experience having, as you shared, like I'm 100 years old, so I've been doing this across decades. And I think the good ideas will find their way. So I could see where you could think that there's this lost generation of innovation. I don't see it that way at all. I think things will find a way. They always will. That really great clinical founders, I keep coming back to that example. They understand the context. They may not say it this way. They understand who their customers are and they understand the changing care. And I think that those things will always progress. The other thing I would say is that when you talk to venture funds, and I could throw stones at venture capital all day long. I was in that environment and I believe that they are Satan. But the other thing I would say is that you have to be able to differentiate and understand other people's circumstance. That when you're working with a venture fund, are they telling you no, or are they telling you no, not right now? If they are, be sure that you understand the nuance. No means we are never, ever going to invest in this, not in our space. I don't understand it. Don't die on that hill. But no, not right now is a different world. No, not right now means that just as early stage companies deal with these challenges, it's an ecosystem challenge. And I would say that great innovation will find a way by building the appropriate ecosystem around your venture to kind of support where it needs to be. Will it be easy? No, but that's your challenge.
No, I'm with you. I agree I would say like a lot of truly great innovations, they'll find a way, right? Part of what I'm thinking of too, though, is I've seen countless innovations and typically they're on like non-surgical intervention side of the equation, and even like direct patient care. So whether that's in rehab or whether that's in, in hospital, inpatient care, et cetera, where it's just a better mousetrap. It works better. There's a real problem that it's solving. The clinical evidence is there for, that this problem exists, but it's just, whether it's kind of in a commoditized space or the, sales price of everything around it's too low or whatever, the reimbursement's not quite there for that type of stuff. It's like, look, this would help every single patient if they had it. And there's like a measurable impact and like an economic value to it, but like maybe you'd sell for 2x revenue, right? And it's just maybe the market's under 300 million and it's just never going to get funding in this venture model. And it's like, I hate seeing that stuff because it's like, man, like, yes, this is innovative and like, this is really cool. But in this market, in this model, and that even goes to the hospital purchasing side, like, oh, we want to consolidate vendors. We want to buy from 2 vendors. That's it. Right. And it's like, so there's even some barriers around that side that are tough to break through. You know what I mean? But anyways, I digress. Oh, I can talk about that all day.
No, you don't. And the one thing I would add to this, and this isn't shock value, if you were to ask companies why they love me so much, why I work with them, is all the reasons you laid out. I will not let that happen. You need to find the people that, when I use the example, die on that hill. There are some things that are too important, and sometimes it's very difficult to do it. And I don't say this with a lot of bravado. You need to build an ecosystem around you that will not let these things happen. Well, are they still going to happen? Of course they are. I think that when you say, like, are we at a really challenging time and an inflection point, we all got to make a choice if we're going to make that stand and die on that hill for innovation, or are we just going to say, nah, it's too hard?
No, for sure. Darkest before the dawn, right?
Yes.
So onto the accelerators, right? So like, I know you've worked with, some of the biggest accelerators in the space. And I know you, like me, believe that, a lot of, I would say kind of the prevailing accelerator model is a bit broken. Like walk me through kind of how you see it in your thinking and how you've written about this a bit, right? Like smaller, hyper-focused programs are the answer. What's that look like in practice? But like, before we talk about what that looks like in practice, let's do some diagnosing. So like, what's your diagnosis?
What my diagnosis is that many times these first-time entrepreneurs, it's really difficult to connect with the appropriate accelerator. So let's lay out the landscape first. There are large global accelerator programs. There are are national accelerator programs, and this goes for around the world. Like you can have your own local program, and there can be things that are very regionally specifically focused. And then you can have kind of your NSF models, and then you can have your Gates Foundation models, and then you have all these hidden corporate accelerators that nobody really knows anything about. They operate behind the black veil of secrecy that no one really knows how to apply to. So I think that as we kind of begin to diagnose the problem is that the real challenge for accelerators is the advancing pace of technology. I would say that, traditional accelerator model, and here's where the stones come out, that you can have an accelerator program that has built their business around sponsorship, right? That they've brought in very large sponsors, they cut checks, they want an early look at innovation. Again, nobody's doing anything wrong. But if these accelerators now at any size that have sponsorship relationships are now looking at the companies through the eyes of their sponsors and really kind of new and innovative technologies, then what if your success metric now is how much venture funding is raised by your cohort? And now you have companies that have raised maybe $50 million. Things haven't really gone right for them, as we were talking earlier. So they're like, hey, I'm going to apply to XYZ Accelerator, even though we've raised $50 million. And they end up in the program. And now you have this program saying our cohort has raised $50 million in venture capital. So the metric of the accelerator becomes disaligned with what we're trying to truly do in Medtech. So they're steered maybe through the eyes of people that have a very hyper-focused but correct focus on the companies that should be in the accelerator, as well as you have these kind of other challenges going on. And it becomes a really difficult challenge of these accelerators now are moving later stage. And I see their announcements. Like I get maybe 5 or 10 announcements from accelerator programs saying our portfolio raised, $600 billion this last quarter. But you match it up with the ones from the other accelerator programs, they're all counting the same company, as possibly an exit.
It's really true. I mean, there's almost been kind of this financialization of the accelerator program and almost like a marketing element to it, where it's like they are more a brand than they are a group and collective with the purpose of driving companies forward, accelerating their progress and development and commercialization, right? It's more, and what you said too, I feel like there is a big element of the tail wagging the dog, where it's like the tail, wagging the dog in the sense that whether it's venture funds, but more often than not, the strategic partners, like the large strategics, right, are like, yeah, we're going to use this as like an M&A kiddie pool where we get close to companies, we get first looks, inside looks, right? Like we get to meet them. That's basically no risk to us other than the small, pittance we pay to be like a supporter, sponsor, whatever. And then like the companies that end up getting, selected are invariably basically on kind of the M&A sector watch list for those large strategics.
What a coincidence. What a coincidence.
Right? And I do struggle with this though. I'm kind of like, is it wrong to do that? No, right? But I guess in almost like in a perfect world, like what is the criteria that these accelerators should really be looking to? Because everyone has an angle, right? You can have a clinical area focused accelerator, right? Or you can say like, we're going to broadly be in med device or whatever, but then like what should really be driving your criteria? Who gets in, who doesn't get in? And I don't know that I have a perfect answer. Like kind of do think though, that's like, it's certainly not altruistic or necessarily even like patient impact minded. I think a lot of the times, like when they're thinking about the influence of who gets in and who doesn't get in, right? And then even what happens during the accelerator too, right? I think they've lost the plot a little bit in my mind, but I don't think it's necessarily calling it nefarious or calling it bad or wrong doesn't feel right, because it's like, well, who's to say what an accelerator's purpose is? So I do struggle with that a little bit.
I have a pretty good idea what an accelerator's purpose is.
Yeah.
And I can't really tie this to a specific accelerator out there, but I will tell you what I think they are. I think the greatest strength of an accelerator is the relationship that they can build amongst the companies that are in that accelerator program.
Yeah.
I think without a doubt that you will not have a better understanding as a founder or be able to address problems more effectively than doing it through a group of peer learning. And I'm going to keep going back to like the clinical founder versus the person that is an actual, maybe they grew up calling on the business side of founding companies.
Yeah.
Those two together, even if they are competing companies, can share so much knowledge and just be there for each other. Like one thing I found in one accelerator program, I built several leadership cohorts, and this was years ago, and they are still together.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is this education and knowledge component, but ultimately I do think the ability to kind of tie people together is incredibly important. You think about like whether you go to college or people you meet along your way. Like I started my career at Deloitte, and those relationships are as important to me today as they were back then. And so I think it's about building those relationships and all the things that can help you advance on a timeline that makes sense.
100%. One of my final points on this too, and I've seen this because I've been entrepreneur in residence for an accelerator. I've been through 6 accelerators of different types and whatever. And whenever you have those cohorts where they're there because they want to have the demo day and they want to say that we were in this accelerator and it helps create momentum, there is just like this general like almost like malaise about being in attendance at the accelerator, the stuff that you do. We have to sit through this session. We're going to have one person there and it's not the leadership. Like it turns into this like almost like a detention center in school suspension. People are just there and they're hanging out and they're on their laptop a little bit and like, oh, there's a session. Great. Pile in the room. Like, do we have lunch today? No. Okay. I'm going to leave at lunch and not come back. Like it's just a whole different vibe for those versus the ones that I've seen where it was like everybody was kind of in the same stage or phase, right? Window, and the sessions were great and the office hours were great. And it was just this, everyone was in that sponge mode where you're just learning and connecting and building and kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed about it versus this just like, we don't even need to be here. We're just here, because we want to, we're raising around and we want to just
funny you should mention the latter. I've had direct experience with, we'll call it that person, and, tried to kick them out of the accelerator. So they flat out told me they just wanted a logo. Well, great. Yeah. Here's your logo. Can you not take up anybody else's time or space?
I have 4 letters for them, GTFO. That's what I would tell them. So I know you've got a really good LinkedIn series of articles that you wrote about kind of that clinical to consumer shift in medtech. And so like, I want to get your thoughts, like is, the future of our industry, what are the biggest barriers companies face when making this transition from kind of the clinical to consumer shift? And that can be with like consumer wearables, consumer products, like, care is definitely moving in the direction. So like, how do you see, it changing, shifting and barriers, that are coming to fore?
So what's really interesting is that, I've been on this journey of self-discovery, trying to find my own path in the world, and a very, very large global strategic asked me to talk about this very topic. Like, what are trends that I see? And I kept coming back to this idea, the really great companies that I was seeing coming through the accelerator programs, they were founded by clinicians, right? Let me show you my little hand over here. And one in particular was developing an EEG technology. And I started thinking about like, okay, so the cardiac space has been way overdone in the wearable sense. And I started thinking about what are other types of data that you can incorporate into wearables that add a lot of value. And I started thinking about brain data. And so I talked with the founder of this company. And the thing that was so interesting is you have these clinical founders that are so focused on how hard it is to get your thing paid for, get into hospital workflows, that they're never looking over here. And it wasn't until I kind of got this push by a strategic to explain why healthcare is an opportunity within this clinical to consumer. And it just, my eyes just opened so wide, because when you think about patients wanting to take responsibility for their own care, let's just start there. If you're in maternal health and you think about the diversity of the settings and the patients and the challenges, and not everybody moves along at the same pace and progression. And I'm not pretending to be an expert on this, but I've now seen 3 or 4 companies that work in the management of patient care. The problem is they don't fit a perfect reimbursement model. So it's very difficult to get that paid for, to adopt it clinically. But what if patients now are becoming so educated that if I were to take a step back, we live in a world where there's so many great innovations in healthcare that even if we adopted all of them, they all had the right clinical evidence. They all could be paid for. They could all have an impact on clinical care. We would bankrupt the healthcare system. I always say, like, one of the fights I will always fight, I think the U.S. healthcare system is one of the greatest healthcare systems in the world, but we're always going to have patients that have challenges.
Yeah.
And we can't adopt every technology. So maybe there's an opportunity that if we begin to educate people that our healthcare system is built around, these major comorbidities and these challenges and these things that are really difficult, but then we also have this pathway where people become more responsible for their care, and they can integrate things and understand things like diagnostic testing, wearables, different types of testing and result can be partner with their clinical care team. I think that's the basis of how clinical to consumer can really change the world and be a guiding light for solving some of these problems we talk about clinical innovation.
Yeah. No, I really like that. I mean, I think you're almost more of an optimist than I am. But because I see the same future, but I don't know that you're going to be able to get a significant enough number of people to like be able to understand like their GFR, their glomerular filtration rate, right? Or their white blood cell, count matters, or their platelets, or, LDLs versus HDLs, right? Like, I don't think you're ever really going to turn the corner and say like, we have enough people that really understand this, that they could take ownership of their own healthcare. But I do still think that shift to consumer, like we can have a model where they don't have to intimately understand. All they have to do is participate in the basically extraction of their more real-time day-to-day or week-to-week, right? Like those types of clinical endpoints, biomarkers, hormones, blood tests, etc. And I envisioned the other day, I was at the bottle washer, like the Baby Breeza thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I was like, man, I could see a future where we have a station like that, but it's just a little diagnostic, right? And once a week, we prick our finger, drop in some blood, whatever, and it doesn't even tell us anything. It says, hey, yeah, we sent it off. But it's going to, my personal AI agent, that's like kind of my health coach, that interfaces with my PCP. They've got a dashboard. They can see their patient stuff, right? They've got their own AI agent that's reviewing all of their patients that they're, covering, caring for, yellow alert, whatever. And so it is like so much more preventative, and it is real time. It is consumer, right? It's at the home, or it's on the patient's wrist, or the Oura ring or whatever. But the patient's they are taking ownership of their own health, but it's not from like a clinical mindset. It's just in terms of there has to be incentive to do it, right? Maybe that's insurance and maybe discounts or whatever. But I honestly think we see the same future. I think putting it on the patients to be like truly their own advocates, like I struggle with that part, and I hope you're right. but I do see that consumer shift being massive, and it's growing every single day.
Yeah. And what I'm talking about, I'd encourage anyone to take a look at the articles that I'm writing on LinkedIn related to this. I'm trying to figure this out myself. But I would say that one of the tenets is that you have things that are clinically validated with significant clinical data that have some kind of clinical foundation. And if I were to give you a real simple analogy, 60 years ago, heart attacks were thought to be bolts from the blue because that's how they showed up on the EKG. And once you had one, people thought, okay, that was a terminal event. You're going to have another terminal event, and that will be it. There's no hope for an outcome. And you look at how far we've come in cardiology and managing chronic conditions related to heart attack. And I think that we can see an acceleration of that data. And it doesn't have to be, I love the way you described it about your AI and your CPC and all these other things. Let's just start with simple things like with maternal health. Let's use continuous glucose monitoring. Let's do that. That sounds pretty meaningful, managing diabetes and maternal health. Let's do that. So that sounds, relatively something somebody can get behind and monitor. And let's just take little steps. Like we don't have to use AI and everything. Maybe a sensor on a watch isn't a bad thing that can flag something.
Yeah. No, and I do think it's interesting. The whole like Whoop FDA kind of fight over the blood pressure insights or whatever they're calling them. I feel like this is a fight worth having because Whoop has validated it, right? They've got clinical gobwads 20 times more than really is needed, I think, right? Around this. I feel like the FDA stance on this, and again, I haven't read everything there is to know about this, so I could be missing some things, but like, I feel like whether it's with, biomarkers or, because blood pressure is what it is right now, right? But like, pulse ox and biomarkers and hormones and epigenetic expressions, right? Hot, cold, overtime, whatever. This fight's just going to keep happening where it's like, and ultimately, my view is more patients having more data about their health is inherently good. So like, that's why I think honestly, Whoop should keep fighting this. And I don't want that, obviously there has to be like some level of like clinical validation, but like, I don't know, the whole, like, should they be regulated as a medical device, whatever, like the lines are blurring. You know what I mean? Should they? I don't know. What does it really mean? Probably just more quality management work for them. Nothing really that different. So maybe this isn't the kind of the bigger fight that I'm making it, but I do think we should be incentivizing and reducing barriers to more patients having more access to more data about their own health versus like trying to restrict it really in any way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is just be careful. So I don't know how to describe this person, but just in a real simple sense, people now, when they Google things related to their own health, it's almost like the response that comes back is you're dying. I can't get this ingrown toenail removed. Well, it's because you're dying.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful about the patient and filtering it through a way that's clinically validated and easy to understand. So I'm with you.
No, I agree. So kind of going back to the, startup, early stage med tech side. Been a part of a lot of companies, right? Some that were great, companies that you've probably seen come through accelerators that were just like really missing the mark on things, but, in your experience kind of, and I would say in the time frame of today, you know what I mean? Because these things, season cycles, everything, in kind of today's environment, what are the most critical elements for early stage med tech companies and their kind of strategy, right? Buckets of strategy, et cetera. What are the things that they're most consistently overlooking that you think are just critical to success?
If I were just to outline the real simple things, it's all got to revolve around your clinical evidence and let me explain that, right? You got to have clinical evidence for regulatory purposes. That is separate from clinical evidence for talking to clinicians. And again, I'll say often, but I'm not going to fight this battle today. So clinical evidence for FDA clearance, for clinical adoption. You're in front of a clinician convincing them that your testing is valid. And the third is economic evidence. That's one element that I think is very quantifiable. What I'd really challenge medtech companies to think about their patient care in three different buckets. I started earlier saying that the U.S. has an incredible healthcare system. There's a group of patients that are going to have outstanding outcomes no matter what you do. And I come from the stroke and cardiovascular space. So there's a group of stroke patients that are going to have really good outcomes. There's a group of patients in stroke that are going to have very bad outcomes no matter what you do. Multiple strokes, high comorbidities, they're older, they are going to have bad outcomes. There's a group of patients in the middle that we need to focus on. What I would really challenge medtech companies to think about are the two things I put together there. What is the clinical evidence related to regulatory and clinical adoption? How does it get paid for? For the patient group you make a difference in. Don't tell me that stroke is a $65 billion a year industry and that you have a solution for 800,000 stroke patients a year, because you don't. You have a solution potentially for a group that can change care, that currently can go one way or the other. That's the story that I believe is fundable, that you build ventures around that can then expand into other areas.
And I would say, why do they want to put those big market numbers out and all those patients? Because that's what the venture model's asking them to do.
Yeah, if I can continue on my rant.
Please.
You are not an AI-enabled solution. Stop it. Yeah. I don't want to see the first words of like a description of your company. So let me repeat back to you the things that drive me crazy that you're solving for. We are an AI-enabled solution that addresses a $65 billion a year problem across every hospital setting. That's great. Thank you. I'm smarter now than when you came to me, as opposed to this. Let me give you this pitch.
Yeah.
Would you believe that there are 40 to 60% of stroke patients that we never determine a cause for? Fact. These patients can go on to have very bad outcomes, because what's important in a stroke is preventing a follow-on recurrent stroke. And if you don't know cause, you can't treat that appropriately. Nowhere in there did I say AI enabled, did I say anything else. But hopefully when you think of it, what catches the attention of things that fall through the gap? And don't exaggerate. Some things, a 10% change in care in a patient population is incredibly significant. Find that thing that when you're talking to a clinician, you can translate into a broader discussion.
Yeah, no, 100,000%. I mean, I always say like the companies that are like putting AI in their name, or just like it's on the header, all that stuff. It's like how people were like an internet company back in like the 90s. It's just like, just everything's got AI in it now. Just stop. Like it's,
stop.
Yeah, just please stop. I don't think the people that are reviewing decks for the first time at a lot of these venture groups, like the first pass people, right, before you can even get a meeting, like sometimes I feel like if you describe it like in the correct way that you should, right, like, well, these stroke patients at 46%, we don't know what it is and we got to find the cause, whatever. Maybe they don't even understand the clinical applications well enough to where they're going to be able to be like, oh, this is very nuanced and like very specific and important problem, but the market's only 1.2 billion. No. And then they just see 65 billion. Yes, they get a meeting, right? So I feel like there's probably some of that going on. And that's not like, that's kind of after the fact. That's not why they're phrasing it that way, but I feel like
goodness, don't get me started on the venture model. I can tell you without a fact that people that are screening decks are more concerned with their afternoon organic snack than they are even remotely concerned about reading your deck. So
I know, it's so funny.
Let's change that. And if I were to just add something about what's important about the deck, I think so I was in early stage venture, and it's very hard to differentiate those. Like when you're in private equity and a company shows up with 50 million in revenue, you can do something with that. Like, okay, I get it. We put in more money and that 50 million becomes 200 million. Like it. That's easy.
Yeah.
But when an early stage company shows up, really explain who you are. A lot of times the person reading the deck isn't going to know who you are. They don't know what you do. I think establishing, why your background is relevant to it. If somebody's good in early stage investing, that's really where they want to go. Like, people say it's all about the people. I kind of think that's kind of like cheesy advice, like say, oh, it's all about the people. But it's all about the stage of the company and what the founder has relevant to that stage in the company. If it's technical, if it's business related, I want to know what that person is, and I want them to teach me something about it. Like, go from, I'm trying to raise $20 million to explain to me exactly what it is that you're trying to do and why it's relevant to something that can really change care in a way. And if you're a venture fund, ultimately, you're going to have that. We need to make money at it. We just can't throw money at things philanthropically, but tie that story together really tight within the first couple of slides. And I believe the people that are genuine will call you back.
Yeah, I agree. It's not, I'm the CEO and we're trying to raise $20 million. It's, I'm an expert in this cardiology space and we're going to help stroke patients figure out why they're having strokes and prevent the new ones from happening. And we're also raising $20 million to do it, right? That's the story. One quick thing you said about clinical data, and I've had this thought in my mind for a long time. So it's kind of the nature of it. If there's a problem that's not being solved clinically, you're trying to address that problem. Makes sense, right? So if the hospital's not addressing that problem, they probably don't have their arms around data capture for the problem in the way that they should, right? Or else if they knew everything about the problem and we're tracking it and monitoring it, right, they may be trying to solve it, right? Or have a solution. So it's I feel like there's a lot of times where you'll be trying to solve a problem and you've got a solution, and then you go to a hospital and say, hey, we want to solve this problem for you. We know it's a big problem. The hospital's like, do we have that problem? Do we have data on that problem? And so you end up almost struggling with that base level surveillance or baseline data of how much that's happening, or the cost of it happening, right, to your economic study point, the cost of the not just the clinical but the economic cost of that problem happening in that facility. And so in my head I'm thinking this data is just all there, right? We have every CPT code, every DRG build, we have every patient admission, every bit of their Epic chart and their PHR. We have all the ERP stuff for how many of these things we buy, how much we use of every single supply and device, etc. I want a Bloomberg terminal in every single hospital where you can sit down and say, how much is this thing happening, or what is the clinical impact of this, whatever. And it looks at all the data and it say, yeah, okay, let me get these patients. I'll look at their charts. I'm going to get the average length of stay for these versus the other cohort that doesn't have this thing. And then I'm going to look at how much supplies we spend on them, and just be able to produce that stuff, because it's just all this data is there. But the hospital admin people, it's just we don't know how much this happens. You know what I mean? And so that's part of your battle.
I have an answer for you. Spencer, this should be your most popular podcast because we are spitting gold today, as the youth would say. So let me jump in here. So I was listing my rules about AI enabled solutions and other things that just drive me crazy. So going into a hospital and saying healthcare is broken is going to be the end of your stay. It's going to be very short, and saying that you don't have the data and there's not a problem. Everything you listed is valid. That when you are working with a hospital, I really want people to redefine how they talk about it as a connection of workflow. All the things that you listed did not specifically point to a precise time where a decision is made in the workflow, where there can be specific criteria around it that you can change. That will have a bearing on outcomes. So those are very important sentences in this, is that clinicians are very busy. If you were to ask a clinician or say healthcare is broken, your discussion will come to an end right then. That should not even be in your investor deck. So take that out. You should understand from beginning to end when a disease, a chronic condition, whatever the condition is that we're treating, if you are going to make it better, you have to know where you are going to make it better and make it so simple they can understand it. In your example, let's say we had the cost of everything, but why did it go wrong? There's going to be a range of outcomes for those patients. There had to be something that you're picking up in the clinical workflow, that there can be a small change that you can implement. So we're not retraining people. We're not telling everybody to do everything different for this patient population. There is a point in time where a difference can be made that's going to have a bearing on the outcome that you can demonstrate. And you need to be able to do that very simply. Nobody wants to pour through the data. A clinician does not want to say, I want to pour through the data. So That's the
No,
only thing I would add to that.
no, it's so key. And if for the people listening out there, I feel like that, like rewind it, listen to him go through that last 2 minutes and then do it again. Because like the clinical workflow and like kind of those within an episode of care, those inflection points where there are turns, decisions made, or opportunities to impact it. And like for you as a medtech founder or whatever with a solution, like really pinpointing and lasering in on exactly when you're going to make that change for what patients and like how you're going to impact, kind of the next bits of care or outcomes for those patients. And this is like very kind of clear and direct in the cardiac space. So TEE is kind of step one, phase one. And then you can go on and then there's like a decision tree of like, if the finding was this, you'll go for, this type of like imaging. And if it's this, you'll go to this type of imaging. And then here's the therapeutic recommendations if the findings are X, Y, or Z. But I would recommend to every single founder that if you're solving for something and there's at all a clinical decision workflow, you need to just put a, diagram. Here's a box, patient comes in, right? And then they get this. What are the options here? If the results are X, Y, Z, they go down what branch? And branch that whole thing out for all of the patients. And then understand how frequently understanding that clinical decision workflow for the people you're trying to solve and for the users and the clinicians that are providing that care is like so important. And I feel like I've like never seen that in a slide, I feel like, or rarely, where it's just a hyper detailed breakdown of the entire workflow and clinical decision workflow. Couldn't agree more.
So the one thing I'd add, Spencer, and when you said back it up, the thing I'd encourage everybody to do is that if you don't know me coming into this, just know that I've published with Leaders in Stroke. And how did I publish with Leaders in Stroke? I worked very hard at this very issue of where changes in care can be made. And I was so good at it that they asked me to be an author and to present data and do all kinds of things only because I worked so hard at this. Like, this is hard, what we're asking you to do. It's not easy.
Yes, it is difficult. It is difficult. We talked a little bit about this, like how typically you'll have clinical surgeon, whatever founder, right? Seed stage and kind of Series A in that, we're 18 months to FDA clearance up to, we are just getting FDA clearance or 6 months after, whatever. So that time period, right? Like, what do you see as kind of the ideal founding team composition? And I would say assume that there's a clinical, surgical, or whatever type founder in there. But like, what do you see as like the sweet spot, ideal founding team composition for the companies in those stages?
Maybe a little different answer than you expected, but let's build like your own ecosystem around it. Like, so I built this ecosystem that included a $4 billion a year organization around a venture I created, had its own challenges, but it's, if we talk about being hyper-focused on the individuals in an organization, I think we need to think of things, if this is a terrible analogy, like a sports team, you need to think about the things that need to happen. Is that you need a person that's accountable, almost like a project manager. Like, I would argue that the new CEO is not somebody waving their hands, running around saying how great we are, but it's somebody that is incredibly efficient at managing multiple tasks at an early stage. You need a regulatory reimbursement person. Think of it, product development, design, and you can maybe fill these roles fractionally. I think also that when you think about problems that you're faced with, everybody thinks like they need to have this board. A lot of the early stage companies I work with, they're like, well, we worked with Dr. Jones at UCSF, so we're going to put him on our board because he's... No, don't put Dr. Jones. I mean, maybe Dr. Jones is invested in 30 medtech startups. That would be great. But what if Dr. Jones is just a clinical person that you like? And so my point back to you is that think about the organization of your company. Think about what you want to be when you grow up. Fill your board with the people that are sincere and humble, and they want to make a difference in care first. You can solve for the other problems, but make sure that they have a certain amount of empathy for what you're going through and a certain amount of technical ability. Then think about the key functions that you need and how you're going to project manage it. And if you're not a CEO that can humbly lead that way and kind of understand the needs of others, what you're trying to accomplish, and build this right ecosystem around your organization that's not dependent on you, I would say that you are the wrong person to be CEO. Nothing wrong with that, but I want to think of early stage CEOs not as people that work themselves to death, but they know what their core competency is. They'll build the right infrastructure around it just to accomplish. Like when you gave me that window of 6 months to 18 months, that is the only thing I would focus on. That is the only thing that is important to me because I can see the end of it. I don't know what happens after it, but that's the thing I'm going to accomplish.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. Let's assume that it's like clinical founder CEO, and I agree with everything you said, by the way. So I think this is just like
you don't have to.
I think it's just a version of that. I mean, honestly, for that stage, I think more than 4 or 5 is almost too many these days. Like I think with 3 or 4, and I think clinical founder. I'm assuming that person is like heavily into the science, the clinical. They understand, the clinical workflow stuff that we're talking about, et cetera. I think, somebody that can be an engineer and designer, right? So like the ability to modify internally designs and things is such a big cheat code because you're not constantly spending money with an outside firm, and you're able to look at a bunch of different options quickly and make decisions. And so like if you have a physical product, someone that can do CAD modeling internal, right? And somebody that understands, manufacturability, like, am I designing something that's not injection moldable? Am I designing something that's so that person is really, really huge. And I think then invariably, and this could be one person, I think it could be 2 people, but like somebody that really can drive, I'm going to understand the economic ROI, put that together. I'm going to, that can build a pitch deck, that can communicate really well, that can be the fundraising lead, kind of the project manager, right? That can manage the task and kind of coordinate between like, okay, our clinical and here's the, how is this lining up, and managing the regulatory consultants and all of that stuff. I think, kind of that like finance, economic, business, with a little bit of marketing, plus the engineer, plus the clinical person. I feel like those teams can run so fast. And if you are a company that like you can find marketing, people or whatever, but also just want to hit on this, the like fractional for like your regulatory and quality, fractional for those types of things. Like, don't just like go with someone because they can do that fractional thing. I think there's a lot of people that used to work at Medtronic or used to work at here or there, and they're out doing kind of their own thing, running their own shop, and they're not going to have 90 clients, right? You're going to be, try to find those people that will like really be a team player with you, feel like they're part of the team, leverage their network and their connections a little bit for you, right? Like that know the vendors or know this, right? And it can help you avoid mistakes more so than I'm just paying you to fractionally, manage our books or something, that type of fractional exercise. So I think
you're way better at this than I am, Spencer. Keep going. Yeah.
No, I'm just, I think a lot of times people think fractional and it's like this kind of like other outside of the company, we pay you to do thing and you give us a deliverable. But I think there's just a big opportunity for these like smaller shop fractional people to be like very integrated into your team to the point that you're not missing a beat, and it ends up saving you money. So,
Spencer, if I were to give you an analogy back, I don't know if we have time for fun analogies, but
yes, we do.
Like I'm a big fan of concerts, like music in general.
Yeah.
I love going to a big concert. Most recent concert I went to was last year. I went to the Foo Fighters, big arena, like
nice.
Place is rocking crazy, like all this cool stuff. Love that stuff. I also love wandering into weird bars where, maybe it's a country band or something that I've never heard of before.
Yep.
So the model in building your team could be similar. There's very broad-based ones about, building out all the expertise, but then sometimes there's ways that, like you were saying, you can find your way into the right people that they don't have a lot of clients. They're not from a big name thing, and you can find them around some of the accelerators you work with. Like some of the companies that I work with through these accelerators, I've been working with for years, but we weren't paired up in the accelerator. I don't charge them. I do this all for free, but it's, I know I'm a real free love kind of guy, but finding the right people that kind of believe in what you do and aligning them with you would be the only thing that I would add to what you're doing. But you're absolutely right that your answer was far better than mine in terms of thinking through the expertise. And I kind of flippantly was focused on a very short milestone. So I thank you for that. That was a great answer.
Well, your answer gave me inspo on that. But yeah, and wouldn't it be great if there was like this, online ecosystem where you could meet and connect with people that could do that? Oh, Exo Medtech, that's what that is. Okay.
What?
Good.
There's a place? Good. I never would have known. No.
Yeah. So I know you talked about this, but like stroke diagnostics innovation, that was like, it's a big focus of yours, and you've done a ton of brilliant work on that. I want to talk about ischemia care. I know you have, you believe that kind of blood-based diagnostics can solve that. Just like unpack that. Tell us more about, kind of, your journey around that, and kind of what you guys are trying to do.
About 15 years ago, I'll move fast through this part. I met the inventors of this technology. They invented RNA expression in stroke. And if you know nothing about RNA expression, it's changes in the blood due to something. And, back at that time, like RNA expression was not mainstream at all. But the other thing the inventor told me was he said, 40% of all strokes never have a cause determined. I'm like, okay, I may not know a lot about stroke, and I do have a heavy medtech background. I was like, well, the world is 40% of anything okay. Like
Yeah.
40% of toenail fungus can't be cured. That seems bad. But what if it's 40% of cancer can't be cured? Well, that sounds even worse.
Yeah.
So I kind of went on this journey of really understanding how to make a difference in stroke. And for everybody who's in stroke, I would say the biggest challenge that you face that I've learned over 15 years of being across many stroke ventures is ultimately, and this is the saddest part about it, stroke patients die. The reality is that we're at a point in care in this world that, stroke patients, you'd have what we call an index event. You have your first stroke, typically very similar to the heart attack description I gave earlier. Patients will go on to have bad outcomes. They will either die from that stroke or they will die from a recurrent stroke. But now we have such better interventional techniques. Like we've been able to identify the thymus brain. We're able to get patients to intervention appropriately. They have a much better outcome from the index event. So that space is good. What we're not very good at is understanding how to prevent recurrent strokes, because half of all stroke patients are readmitted within the first year, and 25% of all stroke patients are going to have another stroke within 2 years. And so this is a very big problem. And so the approach that we took is that there are no blood tests for stroke. We commercialized the first one in the world that kind of addressed this issue of identifying downstream cause of stroke. We've kind of extended it into identifying stroke in the acute setting, meaning did a stroke occur? How do we get patients on the correct pathway? And how do we prevent a recurrent stroke? So I've loved it. This has been the highlight of my career and my life. And
That's
just
awesome.
like many of you that really struggle with what you do, I think part of the reason why I've found myself in all these accelerator programs. So Spencer, you're going to know something about me that a lot of people don't know. I've poured so much of my time and my effort and investment into this issue of stroke. If you know nothing about ischemia care, no, I say this humbly, we probably did everything right. We ran a 1,700 patient clinical trial. We partnered with a $4 billion a year strategic. We launched a test into a very difficult clinical setting. We got it adopted, we got it paid for, and it wasn't enough. So sometimes there's like an ebb and flow in creating ventures. And what I wanted to solve for is if I couldn't solve that problem for myself, I was going to go solve it for everybody else. So that's how I ended up in all these accelerator programs, working across all these disease states, because I wanted other people to be successful. Because I knew how powerful that success could be in changing clinical care. So I kind of went off the rails there on ischemia care, but now
No, that was great.
the complete 1 minute story of where ischemia care is and what we do.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. I mean, I do think on just the blood diagnostic space, right, like what you're talking about, like, these things happen and they're markers, and like we just, haven't found them yet, right? But like those types, whether it's acute care or like let's, nail down the cause of these things and then like change the clinical care pathway. Like it is a huge journey, right? Anytime where you're coming in and like presenting new data, right? And then there's like a new pathway, right, that gets kind of developed, and then those like it's just, yeoman's work, you know what I mean? But it's work worth doing.
The other thing I want to add that was significant about ischemia care and what I talk about today. So there's a reason why I talk about the things that I talk about with you is that so ischemia care raised $15 million, which you may not have an idea about what that means, but we accomplished what other companies in cancer diagnostics and other diagnostics required 100 to 120 million to accomplish. Well, how is that possible? Well, it's possible because I built this incredible ecosystem of clinicians, hospitals, payers, strategics that enabled us to accomplish such amazing things. And so,
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to share that with you. And the other thing I'll add is that I think what we've learned is that, like, if I look at the future of care and tie together a lot of things we talked about today. So I wrote this series on LinkedIn called Pixels to Molecules. And it's written very generally about the integration of blood diagnostics, clinical data, wearables, and putting a really meaningful AI element around that data. Kind of another theme we talked about, what is the future of medtech and where do companies kind of miss the mark, is they think of their technology in a silo. Like they think if I measure X at this point, I can provide a better outcome. That's great if you can do that, but it's like fighting a battle with one hand tied behind your back. I think what we realized, and we were the first ones to realize this, is we ran a pretty extensive clinical trial and collected data across the entire patient journey. This wasn't like we're going to draw a sample of blood and hope it works out.
Yeah.
We recorded an extensive amount of data, and I think what we learned is we learned all this information about workflows and consistencies, the integration of other types of clinical data across it to create this really comprehensive view of what it's going to take to change stroke. And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just sharing with you that's
awesome.
Kind of the journey and the trajectory. And when I talk to you about things today, in the back of my mind, everything I talk about, I've lived very painfully across many different ventures. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, let's go. I've got a couple more questions I just kind of want to make sure we get to, and then, we can kind of wrap this up. The data is really clear. I was like looking at this data just the other day, but like the M&A timelines, right, have changed, right? I think it's now averaging, 12 years, 11 or 12 years from first financing to when companies, are getting picked up for an acquisition or exit, and I think like you see way more blockbuster deals, billion or more, right, than you see, smaller deals. And I think, I don't know if we were recording when I started talking about this, but I think like the average deal size, from like 2019 to 2022, the average acquisition in medtech was, I want to say it was like 13.4 million was the total deal size. And it's now like over 45 million. Fewer deals, later stage, larger deal size. Like, should medtech companies be fundamentally rethinking or changing their acquisition targets they're communicating, their capital strategy and what they're building for, kind of overall strategy, if they have acquisition as the end goal in mind? Or is this a cyclic thing? There'll be a reversion to the mean. This will come back down. Like, how are you seeing kind of the M&A, landscape right now, and how companies should adapt?
I think what I've learned is that medtech cycles don't work in conjunction with where we are across venture cycles and M&A cycles. I think the real challenge for people to think about is what you're building meaningfully and how it fits into a clinical workflow. And if you think that you can improve care and not run your company onto the rocks, that's kind of job number one. I think I shared with you, I have a $2 billion transaction history. And if I were to analyze the data on the companies that I've been involved with M&A from the time they started to the time that they acquired, it's really lucky how they ended up where they were. Like I don't know how they could have ever put themselves like day one. Even a company I was involved with, like I was a founder in a company that had a $95 million exit. That was scrambling from day one to get to like some kind of meaningful endpoint. And one thing we talked about earlier is that I really believe that the cycles are coming so much more quickly now, and the companies are so diverse. And the reason these exits have moved further away, I'll give you a couple of good reasons. One, I'm going to say this, just check the data. Many people that were in M&A 3 years ago have been fired or relocated out of those positions. So you have a whole new generation of M&A people across these larger organizations. Yeah, I'm generalizing pretty broadly, but I am.
And you're talking like corporate BD, the people that are looking at companies to acquire. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. Check how long these people have been in these roles. I can tell you firsthand, they are relatively new if they survive through the 2020s and beyond, because when companies weren't getting funding, they weren't growing, they weren't exiting. And if you're in an M&A role and you're not acquiring or divesting or doing something, guess what? We need a regime change. So not your fault. Thanks for coming, but now you're out. So you have that dynamic. And there was another part of your question. Sorry, I was thinking about specific people I knew that got sacked over the last several years.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about like, it's obviously changed, right? We're in a different landscape now. Like, do you think it'll revert to the mean, and like, should medtech founders and companies like in the earlier stages, like be changing capital strategy or anything they're doing?
There was something I wanted to build on that, is that, if you were to talk honestly to somebody at Medtronic or Stryker or fill in any company, I'm not saying them in particular, what they're going to look at you for is, do you understand how they sell things? And are you immediately accretive? Are you building revenue for them in that specific line? Can you identify the specific division within that organization that sells that product or service?
Yeah.
And can you easily be adopted and integrated at scale? If the answer is no to any of those, don't waste your time today. Thanks for coming. But really what these companies have done is that they're looking at things that they've had relationships for a number of years. And you had this turnover in M&A that I mentioned. And now you have this kind of reversion of some of these larger companies that have been in their pipeline being acquired. I don't want to say this cliche that people should focus on building cash flow stable organizations that fills a specific clinical need, that it's very early in its development and fills in that gap of patients that we don't know what to do with, and begin to build a relationship with the strategic where you educate them on why that's a very important part. And I would argue that the technology that you develop, as well as your ability to communicate how that technology is going to serve a need today and the future, almost showing them the future. And I'm not talking about showing them you're going to hit 1 million in revenue this year and hitting beyond. But one thing I have found in successful M&A, it was built on relationships that we built early on. And specifically, I learned how to speak the language of that organization that was the acquiring company. So if you think of a large organizations have divisions. They have presidents that are in charge of those divisions. And your ability to find your way within a division, it doesn't start with the division president. And it doesn't start with somebody in business development. They're just in a role to order the afternoon snack for everybody else. Find somebody with operating responsibility that has P&L and sales responsibility for your customers. And I know this may be way complicated for people, but you have to understand how these strategics are selling into organizations that you want to sell into and be able to explain to them how what you do fits.
Yeah.
If you can do that, you're on the path to working with them. And what I would suggest is not go to these large organizations and say, how can you acquire us today? Like, let's each write down a number and put in the middle and let's see if we agree. It really is more talk to them from a revenue perspective, that when you're on a path, think about how you partner together at an earlier stage, make it very risk-free to them in a way that's very creative, that you're understanding their language, what's important in revenue growth. Like if you have something that you can generally see being significant to that person's revenue growth, and you can pilot it in a way that's no risk to the organization that's trying it, and they're willing to do that, that really is your path forward to, one, building sales within your organization, but building a history with a potential acquirer and go into it with the objective of having a successful pilot.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I would love, I don't know how much of this is like being done, but in my head, I'm thinking like, part of the risk is like, we're going to, say you make a relatively small acquisition, right? But like you want to make good on it, right? So you push it out to your entire sales team and all this stuff, right? And there's people discount the integration and switching cost, or I guess like the acquisition process, right? Like, oh, the acquisition didn't go, you'll often hear, right? Like the integration's been bad, or, this, that, and the other. And I think like, when you're a big company, huge company, acquiring a pretty big company for like $1 billion, there is so much, integration risk there, right? And that integration risk is not zero, but like if you're acquiring a smaller company, right, like it's inherently less integration risk because there's less to integrate, right? I don't know why I feel like that's not really like given like full weight. I know a lot of acquisitions are about moving the stock price and whatever to a degree. But I've always thought like there could be a model where, like you said, reducing the upfront risk for them. There's integration risk, there's capital risk, right? So saying, hey, like the total deal size may be 30 million. You're only going to be out 5 million upfront, right? And then we're going to roll this out, right, in the Northeast region, only that region, learn what we learn, decide how fast, where else we're going to roll it out, et cetera. And then the rest of that 25 million payout on the total deal comes through, revenue milestones, rollout milestones, whether it's expansion of indications, you name it, right? But I feel like you don't see a ton of those types of deals, and I know this is like kind of like pie in the sky idealistic, but like I feel like net for how large these companies are and like what, hey, well, we're making a $5 million bet plus some integration in the Northeast region with the VP of sales over this division and the 20 reps that are there. Like net, like I feel like the risk is so low and the potential return you could communicate to say like, hey, if this even meets our base case expectations, this can be an accretive value of, $50 million to your bottom line next year. You know what I mean? Or in 2 years or whatever. So I don't know if that's like whose job it would be to pitch that, to propose that. And I know it's like, well,
I can build on that. I think you are 100% right. And it's on the company to pitch that to the strategic. Strategics don't care about figuring out how you fit. They've got bigger problems, like, and what I would suggest is that you need to understand their language. Like you were saying, like you have to sit down when you were talking about regionally. You have to sit down, understand their sales, who their salespeople's call points are. And it's almost like if you were to script it out, how they sell this, you need to teach them how to sell this in their language. Like I guarantee you, they talk about things differently than the way that you would do this with their customers. And they have to be comfortable selling that product. And the people in the field have to be confident in the product and that it's going to be meaningful to the salesperson's bottom line.
Yeah.
And people don't want to put in the time. Like they don't know how to start that.
Yeah. It's honestly too, like part of your M&A, if you want to get acquired in 2 years, right? 2-3 years, like part of your M&A strategy should be the product manager, the VP of sales over that division, right? The portfolio manager, whatever they want to call them, like know those people, right? Talk to those people, buy them coffee, ask if they're going to a conference when you see them on LinkedIn, right? Like engage with them and learn all of those things that you're talking about, right? And then you can have those relationships that are developing, and then parallel path, you're talking to the corporate BD people, and you're basically, that entire conversation with corporate BD people is just informed by all of the information and guidance that you've kind of extracted from understanding the people that are actually going to sell it, how they're selling it, where they're selling it, how this could get rolled out, integrated, their division, their structure, all that stuff. So honestly, I've not thought about it like that. I was kind of just spitballing over what you said, but
no, it's great. And
really talking to those salespeople and product owners, right, that are going to be taking this in and having to do things with it, right?
And the one thing I would add, I'll just add one thing to that I think is really important, is this idea of that if you were to have an undertone around that discussion you're having, it should be we company A, the startup company, we can do something that you will never, ever, ever be able to do that's of value to your customers. The other piece of that is, because we do this, you will sell more of your existing product. So I was going to avoid naming names, but we had a partnership with Thermo Fisher. They were absolutely the best partner we could ever hope for. That anything that, they had some of the turnover I mentioned, we worked with them. They delivered 100% on everything that they said that they would do for us. And so when you talk about like, why did we do on 17 million what took others 100 million? That was a big part of it.
Yeah.
But the thing that got them most excited was that I was able, if you know nothing about me, just know I walked into one side of a very large organization and walked out of the other with millions of dollars of support. And it was all based on, you will never, ever be able to do what we do. It's not going to be possible. And, I went into the reasons why. It wasn't puffing. It wasn't threatening. It was, we can do this and you will never be able to do this because you're not built for it. The other side of it was in total revenue. So this goes back to understanding their language. I knew that our product would sell more of their product. And I made an estimate of it. I said, combined, this will be 800 million in new revenue to you. And what? And then we walked through it. And, they kind of look a little side-eyed at you. And they're like, I don't think it's 800 million. Do you think it's 10 million? No. Do you think it's 100 million? No. Well, where is it then? Like, tell me where this didn't make sense to you. And it didn't really not make sense anywhere. Well, that's the point.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe my last question, and then I'll kind of turn it over to you and you for kind of one of your kind of final takes. But we've kind of danced around this, but like the healthcare payer side, like the insurance companies, the reimbursement. And I know you've worked like extensively with, hospitals and payers and kind of building, an ecosystem like you were talking about. What do you think the biggest disconnect is between what medtech innovators think the market wants versus what insurance will reimburse, or just kind of that like general market access around it? And I would say this is like, what are the medtech innovators getting wrong, whatever. And then I would say maybe broadly, like, would love to hear your just kind of diagnosis and things on like kind of the reimbursement landscape.
Oh man, I think the thing, so when we were launching ischemic, our initial test, I talked to a senior medical director at a major payer. And just as I have told you, I gave you the readmission rates, how challenging stroke could be. And the thing that was really cool is she dismissed me right away. Like, this is not true. I will never talk to you again. And this is the end of our relationship. Thank you for coming. She called me back and checked the data and said, you are absolutely 100% right and well researched. I just didn't expect that. And we became friends. Like, we're friends to this day.
Yeah.
She's moved on from that role. And the thing that I learned from that is that if you were to look at things from a payer lens, separate, CMS from payers and every payer's individual, don't think for a minute that so going back to things never to put into your deck, we save the healthcare system money. There is no such thing as a healthcare system. And by that, what I mean is that every hospital is individualized. Within that hospital, they work with a number of payers and they work with CMS. They may all be together, but you are not saving all of them money or any one of them money or whatever. So when you think about how you work with payers, it really starts with an understanding of how it relates to their patient population. So in particular, I want you to be thinking about that if you work in chronic conditions, like I work in stroke, you have to understand that the average time a customer or a patient is on a payer roll is about 2 years. So nobody's doing anything wrong, by the way, when I describe this to you.
Yeah.
Their goal is to get that patient to the 2 years when they will come off the rolls. So when they're thinking about hospital readmission, they try to think about the things that they can control. So when you're pitching something clinically, you're focusing on the workflow and the efficiency. When you're talking to a payer, you have to talk specifically about how they're saving money within a patient population in which they operate and understand the time in which they are responsible for that patient. And as you can tell, that is hard to do. Like, no matter what you do, if you're not thinking about it. So your specific question was, what are things that people aren't thinking about?
Yeah.
They're thinking we have a healthcare system in the US, and I don't want to pick a fight here with anybody, but we do not have a healthcare system. We have individual payers and hospitals that aggregate around solving patient needs.
Okay, that is, again, this is another one of those rewind points for people listening, because it's so pertinent. I was working, shout out to Cytex Ortho, was working with Brad and doing some of this kind of research and discovery around payers and looking at the clinical data. There's a really good study. I don't know the title off the top of my head, but it broke that down. And I think it was like, how long are patients with their current insurance carrier, right? And it was like after 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, like how long people persist. And it was like a shockingly fast turnover for how much people switch insurance. And it's largely because of employment, right? In our country, your private insurance, for the most part, for a lot of people, is tied to your employment. People are switching employers more so than they did, 50 years ago when they worked at the steel mill for 35 years and then they retired, right? So, but I think that's so key to understand. And there's a good research study on this out there, because like Brad, what Cytex Ortho does, right? It's early stage hip OA treatment. And so there is a huge long-term economic benefit if you're the payer over that period of time, right? But there was this like, okay, how are we going to communicate this to payers? Because this or a hip replacement. And so it's this, and it's how much is that cost of care over this kind of episodic period of like 2 years with follow-ups and OT and all that stuff. So it was just I kind of reached the same conclusion of like, wow, like this is, people think about like, oh, it's better for that patient's payer. Which payer? The one now? Yeah. The one they're going to be on next year, or the one 5 years after
Exactly.
that?
Exactly.
Yeah, really, really, really good point. So Jeff, this has been, I don't say this every pod, I've said it a couple times, but I think this is my favorite pod that I've done thus far. Like so many nuggets, so much wisdom in there from you. Thank you for coming on. Before we wrap it up though, wanted to give you kind of like, floor is yours. This can be, you can plug anything, contrarian take, something that, recommend a book, whatever you want, kind of floor is yours. Take it away.
Oh man. Thank you so much, Spencer. Well, the being part of the Mutual Admiration Society, I just admire you so much in what you've done. Like, there are moment of praise for you. I've been around the space and the accelerator space, and to see what you've done with Medtech over the years that I've known you is nothing short of amazing. Like, if I personally were to do anything, I would do exactly what you're doing. I think the ability to provide the content and connect people You clearly have a vision of where you're going. So congratulations on all that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Just to be clear to the audience, that you did not ask me to say that. I think you and the other people you work with there are just absolutely amazing from that point of view.
Thank you, Jeff.
The other thing I would encourage people, and specifically people that are in your program, is that trust your instincts more. You know more than you think you do. Be able to separate fact from fiction when you're looking at how to advance your company and to make good decisions. Do your research, understand your strengths and weaknesses a lot more. The other thing I would strongly encourage people to do, if I can get in one more point that I was thinking about, like I would humbly suggest, and again, this is one of my favorite podcasts, the favorite things I've ever done in terms of talking to another person about what I do, I guess, in a way. And I'm very quiet and humble about what I do. And so the next statement I'll make, I don't say it willy-nilly, is that, when you think about your expertise clinically in what you do, I originally came from the business side of consulting, and I published with leaders in stroke. Well, how does that happen? I worked very diligently to become the best in my craft. By that, what I mean is that I recruited every site into our clinical trial. I physically went there and waited till a clinician talked to me. So there's this, it's a myth if you think you're going to email people. Like, God bless if you could send an email and get somebody to sign up. But a moment that came to me when you and I were talking was, so I went and met with, I'm in stroke, and I met with one of the people that was one of the leading people in thrombectomy becoming standard of care, because I felt that he had so much pull in the world of stroke that if I wanted people to understand what I felt was important, I needed people to spread that message. And he was one of the leading KOLs in the field. I tell you, man, I went to his office. First of all, I had to drive 6 hours to get there. I'm sitting in his office. He's 2 hours late. I finally get shown into like a patient room because he's seeing patients. All right. So I go into a patient room, and for the next 2 hours, it is stump the band. I am getting grilled on every nuance of stroke care and stroke treatment. And the worst part about it is, for those of you that know stroke, we're going down like small vessel disease and branches of stroke that have nothing to do with what I do. But it is like Clubber Lang in Rocky 3, and I'm just taking a beating. And when we finished a line of questioning, he didn't tell me whether I was answering the questions right or not. And this went on, like it was an hour, then a break. I'm sitting there for a half hour, another hour, then a break. And then like it's this break and talk and break and talk. And I never even know if he's coming back. And one time he doesn't come back. So I'm sitting here at 6 in this dark office, like waiting for somebody to come to me. I figured, well, I guess that's it. And sure enough, a nurse comes in and says, and I thought it was to be, just get the hell out. But it was, Dr. Smith, he wants to see you again next week. It wasn't like you did a good job he
scheduled a follow-up.
that was the moment where I knew I was good at what I did. Like I didn't need him to tell me that I was right from that point forward. Like I knew that whatever came next, what I did wasn't going to fail because I hadn't done my work. And so the takeaway is that no matter what you do, you're far more capable than you think you are. All the founders that you work with through your program are incredibly, they're smart. They have some inclination of clinical or design and development, and they're far more capable than they think they are. And trust their instincts. So the example I gave you when I was talking about trusting your instincts, I trusted my instincts in all those answers. I knew what I knew and knew what I didn't know. And if I didn't know, I said I didn't know. But if I knew and I had a guess, I would make assumptions. Yeah. So the point is that everybody who's listening here and in your programs, they're far more capable than they even think they are. And to really push that. So
that's so awesome.
That's it.
That was really, really good, Jeff. I mean, just like, believe and trust in yourself, but not just like some blind trust in who you are at that point in time. I think like what I'm hearing from a lot of that is like, believe in your potential and trust in your potential. And if you're super, super early in your career, right, develop your instincts and then trust your instincts. You know what I mean? Because you've got more potential than people are going to give you credit for. And then the other big thing is just show up and put in the work. You know what I mean? If you want to do big things in a space, you need to be a big hitter in the space and be able to spar with anybody on the topic that you're saying, you want people to give you money to go develop this thing. You need to be an expert in the space, right? You want someone to buy your company
Absolutely.
for 50 million. You need to be an expert in that space. There's no substitute. You can't hire a fractional expert, to replace your own expertise. It's got to be you. So put in the work, put in the time. There's no shortcuts. What's that saying? It's not easy, but it is simple. You know what I mean?
The last thing I'll say is that, like, having done this for a number of years, the best people that you will work with, going back to the Clubber Lang, they want to knock you out right away. Like they want to know what you know, and you've got to lead them. So building on what you said, you got to hang in there with your own confidence, put in the work, and give people a reason to want to work with you, because the people that you want to work with are going to be the hardest on you.
That's right.
No questions asked.
That's right. And you don't take it personally. Know what's happening and field it with grace. You know what I mean? You got to do that. So,
Jeff, it's funny, like the last thing, so I promise I'll let you wrap up after this, but that example I gave you, like hour after hour of questioning, the clinician I was meeting with, he took it as a personal challenge that he was going to knock me out, that he was going to figure out what I was capable of doing. And I look back on that now, and like, that was probably the best 6 hours in an office I'd ever spent.
Yeah, that's so awesome. That's so awesome.
Anyways, back to you. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. I'm just going to wrap it up here. And remember, hang on, we got to let this upload. Yeah. But Jeff, for everybody, Jeff June, innovation expert, multidisciplinary operator, investor, advisor, accelerator, shaman, ecosystem builder. Thank you for everything that you've done in your career to advance, Medtech and the countless founders and the countless lives you've touched. And thanks for coming on my pod, and thanks for being a part of XO, and the kind words that you said there. But can't thank you enough for being on. Seriously, this is one of the funnest and kind of most nuggets of wisdom and just enlightening pods that we've had. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Spencer. And likewise for all the work that you do. And one thing I will say, that this place is the only place you will hear these stories on my background. I have not told these stories anywhere else. So
good. We got the exclusive. We got the exclusive.
So thank you for allowing me to share those stories. So thank you.
Of course. And if you're in the audience and you stuck around this whole time, thank you for joining this on the Medtech Innovation Podcast by XO Medtech, hosted by me, Spencer Jones, founder at XO Medtech. And if you're interested in XO Medtech and you haven't tried it out yet, you should join now. Got a free tier. You can get in and get some of the sauce that we've been talking about today. So with that, we'll sign off. Jeff, thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.